Altfik. It was way up north in the Arctic Circle, next to the frozen lake and at the foot of the Twisted Sister, a hard gray rock formation that rose like a wall, 600 meters straight up to the sky. You rarely saw the top, but you knew it was there, a jagged precipice that jutted out and hung over the village, like you didn't already feel small enough in that place. I never did get used to the thick darkness of the polar night. For months the sun did not rise above the horizon. There would be 2 hours of refracted twilight around midday that made the snow glow sickly pink. For the rest, it was all shades of black. The wooden schoolhouse smelled of fusty boots and mittens, wet leather, and heating oil. When the afternoon school bell pealed, us kids would troop to the hallway and start pulling on layers of skins and downs until we could hardly bend our limbs or move our bodies. No one was supposed to open the front door until everyone was ready for it. But I'd still be pulling on my second layers when the others would be done. With their balaclavas rolled down over their faces, they would nod at each other, and someone would open the door. The wind, sharp as a whip, always stung. The others would troop out the door while I'd be gasping for breath and fumbling on more clothes, my fingers already numb. Outside, the trick was to move as fast as the gale and the weight of your layers allowed. I'd hobble to the ski rack, scrape ice off my bindings and shoes, and click-clack the long, thin slats to my feet. Then I'd push off with my poles towards the frozen lake and flip on my head torch and follow the small erratic light orb it made in the snow. The wind drowned out most other sound, except the swish-swishing of my cross-country skis, my wet breathing in my woolen balaclava, and the occasional crack of a far-off night hunting rifle. I'm just passing through. I think in rhythm to the back and forth slip-sliding of my skis, stabbing the snow with my pole. Just till Dad builds the bridge. I tell myself over and over. Problem was, I repeated those lines in my jumbled accent to anyone still willing to listen. The looks I got then should have warned me about something. I said it to feel strong, but it made people there feel something bad. I know now how easy it is to hate an outsider, especially one that feels too good to belong. But as a boy of 14, there was a lot I didn't understand. Layers under layers that I did not see. I'd ski down the lake to the company hut that had been assigned to us. As soon as I opened the door and pulled off my face mask, the smell of burning wood and canned fish would hit me. I'd never know if Dad was feeding the cats that came with the hut or was making our dinner. Both smelled the same. Lunch, dinner, and cat food was canned herring or canned cod, or canned salmon or canned tuna. For our meals, he'd add canned tomatoes or frozen peas or frozen spinach. And always big splashes of long life double cream. Fat is your friend in the Arctic Circle. If Dad was in a good mood, he'd let me sprinkle sugar on my plate and give me some dry bread that I'd tear up and press down into the slosh to sop up the briny cream. In the beginning, he talked about the bridge and asked me about school. Later, with both topics fraught, we ate our meals to the sound of the crackling fire and the creaking wooden hut slowly heating up after another cold day, and always the wind. I've learned not to talk about what happened there. Even people who mean well will say stuff like, "Oh, kids can be so cruel," and have no idea. That far up north, nothing grows tall. There are only stunted gray shrubs in wide open spaces and twisted rock formations that don't yield for nothing. And there's no place to hide for the hunted and nothing for shelter. Avalanches start small. Sometimes all it takes is a tremor. I guess this story started with a laugh. At school, I was the youngest in my class. Right after I arrived, they had moved me up 2 grades. But I still wasn't learning anything new, and now even the small girls were bigger than me. One day we were doing a math test and I laughed. It was high-pitched, my voice hadn't quite broken yet, with sharp edges, and it bounced around, empty, in the quiet concentration of the room. Everyone looked up and turned their head towards me. I couldn't explain the laugh at the time, but I think I can now. Our teacher, Herko Jensen, had said the test would be hard, but 10 minutes later I was done and there was an hour left. To my right sat Per. He was too big for the small desk, and when he bent his legs, the whole table came off the floor and hung suspended on his quadriceps. Now he sat hunched over, and the tip of his tongue stuck out between his pulpy lips. His paper was full of eraser crumbs. He must have been 17 at least, but he was still sweating over the first sum. Behind him sat Hedda. Of everyone there, she scared me the most. I didn't know how old she was. I didn't think anyone did. But she had woman-sized breasts that popped out of her tight hand-me-down sweaters and the face of a pug. She was tapping the end of her pencil on her lips and putting it in her mouth, between her small, square front teeth. Then everything just sort of melted together or something. Those kids, those stupid sums, and those tubby tits that I wanted to press my thumbs into like melons. So I laughed. Per stared at me. He saw the paper on my desk, all the sums done, and his neck went red and splotchy. Hedda squinted, puckered her face, and said, "Dick." Herko Jensen looked down and shuffled his papers, and outside the wind whistled. From then on, things started to rumble. A couple of days later, we played basketball in gym class. Hedda and Per were captains. They had chosen their teams. And I was left standing, unchosen, in my loose sweatpants and oversized t-shirt. Per and his team stood to the right, Hedda and her posse to the left. Per snorted, "I don't need him." Almost too quickly, Hedda said, "Then I'll take him. I can always use a man." The other kids snickered. Hedda smiled at me and then ran for the ball. I watched her body jiggle in her gym clothes. Hedda was faster than you'd think. She was short and fleshy, but she knew how to move. And whatever she played, she wanted to win. With basketball, she would get in your face with her hot red jowls and scream, "Pass me the ball, you fucker." But not that day. That day she was quiet. I looked over at her, and she caught my glance. She pushed out her chest. Her nipples pressed against the white t-shirt, and I could see their dark shading through the thin cotton. I felt a deep warm twitch and turned away. She followed. All through the game, she stuck close. She leaned into me as she passed, her hip against mine, her fingers brushing my hand as she went for the ball. I tried to focus on the game, but felt a hot, edgy burn. I cursed. At halftime, she walked towards me as I had the ball and pressed herself to my chest. The ball rolled away from me. She reached out and said, "These balls will do," and cupped my stuff through my sweatpants and squeezed my half-raised penis. I froze. Too late, I backed away. She looked at me and then started to squeal. "Well, Micah, you have the twisted sister in your pants for me." I ran and heard the explosion of laughter just before the changing room door slammed behind me. That night I sat in the cabin and stared at the fire, but my shame burnt hotter. It must have been a few weeks later that I was sitting on a bench, fumbling with my snow pants in the freezing hallway. The others had left, or so I thought. "So you think you're fucking smart," I heard, slightly muffled. I looked up. It was Per. He towered over me. In his extra layers, he seemed twice as big. His black balaclava covered his face, and I could only see his cold, porky eyes through the peepholes. Behind him, leaning against the front door, stood Hedda, in her grubby purple snowsuit, her arms crossed in front of her, her mask rolled up, her face hard. My throat tightened. "No," I said, my pitch way off. I fumbled with my belt buckle. I tried to joke. No, look, I can't even put on these snow pants. I don't know how you guys do it so fast." The masked face stayed quiet. His eyes gave no sign that I'd spoken. He picked up my head torch from the bench next to me and crushed it in his hand, and then grinded it with his boot. He looked up at Hedda and she nodded, and they turned and left. I let out a long breath and fell back against the wall. That afternoon I skied to the cabin in total darkness, faster than usual. There, without a head torch, you were nothing but prey. A few nights later I walked into the cabin and I was still brushing the snow off my sleeves when my dad called out from the kitchen, "The cats are anxious." I pulled off my hat and looked around. "Something has them spooked," my dad said. I saw the black one, thing 3, crouched under a heavy dresser. It had flattened its huge furry body to fit under it. It looked up at me with its yellow eyes and mewed softly. I'd never heard it do that before. These were wild Norwegian forest cats. They only came inside in the evening to wolf down some food before taking off again. They didn't mew or purr, and if you tried to pet them, they'd rip off your skin. One of the other cats, thing 1, was darting around the kitchen in a frenzied circle. "Well, where's thing 2?" I asked. Because they didn't belong to us, we didn't feel we had the right to name them. But as friends were hard to come by in that place, we'd started calling them thing 1, thing 2, and thing 3. "I haven't seen her," my dad said. "Can you check outside?" I tugged on my hat, grabbed the flashlight from the dresser, and pulled open the front door. Outside, I trudged the perimeter of the cabin, pointing the beam of light this way and that way, my boots sinking deep in the snow with each step. I was near the shed when my light flew over a flicker of red in the white, and I swung it back slowly. Bloody drips, splashes and spills, the snow soaked with their primitive pattern. With my light beam, I followed their haphazard trail to a wild spatter under the door of the shed. I edged my beam upwards. At first I didn't understand what I was looking at. Something had been nailed to the door. I remember thinking it looked like a big piece of fabric, but then I understood what it was. In the round spotlight of my torch hung thing 2, or at least her skin, stripped clean off her body, stretched out akimbo, her thick fur dripping. I fell to my knees, sinking down in the snow to my waist. It took me a while to get up and pry out the long nails holding her in place. Her head was still on her, but so much smaller in her slick wetness. I wrapped the rest of her skin gently around her head like a blanket, and held it in my cupped hands for a while. She'd never let me hold her when she'd been alive. Then I buried her by some bushes, deep in the snow, and knelt down beside the small mound. Darkness folded around me. It was then I knew that this wasn't an end, it was just a beginning. Next time they'd come hunting for me. I sat there until I felt my toes freeze and heard my dad call.